Going round and round and round and round. We're going to see what we have here.
This is Erwin Rothenberg with the History and Archives Project of the National Association of Black and White Men Together. And I'm interviewing today James Creedle, long-term member of the NABWMT and member of the New York chapter. James was on the first board of directors of the NA, and he was co-chair of the NA from 1986 through 1988 with Tom Horan, and he certainly has played a pivotal role in the birth and development of this organization, and is widely recognized as one of the great icons of this organization. Good morning, James.
Good morning. I don't know about icons. Interesting concept.
Now, how did you first hear about the concept of black and white men together?
In 1979, I broke up with a lover of several years. Actually, I met my lover at college, and I guess the fun part of that is we both played on the basketball team, and so the joke is that we threw passes at each other on the basketball court. And Nick and I were together at the time I met him in college when I first went to Rutgers, New York in 1968. And we became lovers later that year. And we broke up in 1979. And I was actually looking for, spent the next year meeting different people in different kinds of ways. It was difficult because being single, I never had the experience of coming out in the community as a single person, so this was something very difficult for me. And wanted to find a person who I could relate to, and it was difficult to do that. And my barber actually told me that this was this interesting group that he had heard about that was meeting in New York, and it was called Black and White Men Together. And he suggested that I should go there, and we would go together. The night that we decided that we'd do that, it met on Friday night. Every Friday night, it had already established meeting times. And it was at the Institute for Human Identity was the place, and Henry Reemhoff, who was on the Institute's staff, was one of the initiators. He and Bob were were the two people who were intimately involved with starting the group. And so I decided to go, and he ended up not meeting me where we were supposed to meet. So I said, I'm going to go anyway. It's a Friday night. I had made plans to do this. And I found it to be a very powerful experience in terms of coming there and feeling welcome. And I don't remember the issue that was being discussed that night, but I found it immediately a way to meet men who were interesting to me. And besides the barroom, I've never been an alcohol person. I don't like alcohol. I've never could deal with that very well, and so going to bars and being in smoke-filled rooms, I don't smoke and all of that stuff. At least at that time, I didn't smoke cigarettes. And so, that was bars was not a place, and also being coming out of a relationship, I never having the experience of being single in that sense, and meeting men in that way was a place for me, and I found that to be right away. People were friendly, they were interesting in a variety of men, and it was more than connection with the white men. It was also a connection with the black men in the group, and it was meeting. I had not been a part of a group in any significant way prior to then. Most of my work had been in veteran stuff, and I had connections all over the U.S. in terms of veterans, but never been actively in any gay group. And the groups that I did meet were through friends. In fact, a person who was with the fraternity that Nick and I belonged to, Teak, I found out that he was gay, and we met and we talked, and he introduced me to the idea of going to some of his groups that he was involved with, but they were all white men, and it was, just kind of feeling not quite right, or their agenda was not my agenda from the very beginning. So I stuck with my veteran stuff all that time, and so this actually immediately became another connection for me, and the first connection to me with the gay community.
How long were you active in the New York chapter before you heard about possibly a meeting of other groups as well, like in San Francisco, or when Mike Smith was working on the quarterly, I think he called it at that time, the WMT quarterly? Were you already active in the chapter before you participated in the very first get-together in San Francisco?
Yes, I was very active. From the minute that I met the group, I became involved. I started going to the meetings right away. We had interesting kinds of discussions, and in creating the board of the local group at that time, we were introduced to this issue of this newsletter. I don't remember any details of any discussion, but I know there was a newsletter that came out, and we were having problems with the concepts that was going on in the newsletter because it tended to be, and actually it manifested in terms of from the very beginning it became a challenge in the sense that we had a very, what people describe, New York had a very political position and a very political agenda, and San Francisco had a very social agenda, and that dichotomy, that kind of challenge became immediate part of what expressed itself later on when we finally did get together. But there was, during the course of the year, there was a discussion of a meeting in San Francisco, and from the very beginning we made it a policy of co-chair of our group. That was one of the major decisions that we made early on, and a discussion of what was to happen eventually in San Francisco. I don't remember all the details of it, but we came there with a sense of what we wanted to accomplish as a group, and some of the standard stuff that we thought needed to be part of any participation in anything larger. Because if I recall correctly, many other groups went there with the idea of forming some kind of national connection. We didn't know what that would look like, but we went there with that idea, that concept.
Would you say that many of the early concepts of power sharing and equal division between black and white originated with the New York chapter?
I wouldn't say that per se, but I would say that we had a very strong position about that in terms of our participation in anything that would come out of the conference. We had, during the course of the program, we made a policy of, once we got there and sort of set the scene for what was going on, we immediately, in New York, maintained that kind of thing, that even in our convention, I don't think we do that now, because I don't think we participated as much recently in conventions, but we always had a breakfast meeting or an afternoon meeting to sort of talk about what has happened, what's going on, and we made it a specific point of getting in fact, we took money from our budget to make sure that those members who could not go, we would have a equal division among black and white of people who we would send. There'd be other people who may go on their own, but we would send a core group, and one of their responsibilities was to represent the organization. And so that was also very on part of what we talked about and what we agreed to. So we, as I said, we went there with a very clear outline of what we wanted to do, maybe in terms of how we looked, how we represented ourselves, and what we saw in being connected with a national entity.
How many people came from the New York chapter? Can you recall?
I think there was 6, but I'm not. I don't remember all. I knew there was some people who did not go as official representatives from New York, but if I recall correctly, it was Henry, myself, Don Reed, Lydell Jackson. I'm not sure if Mitchell was there at that time. And I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
What was it like that first get-together?
It was very powerful. It really was an eye-opening kind of thing, because to walk into a room and see all of these men from different parts of the United States, as well as internationally, because as you know, it ended up being an international association until we tried to get a 501c3, and then we said that we couldn't. It was decided at that point that we couldn't do that. So we did decide on it being an international organization, because it had people from, as far as I remember, from people from far away as Vancouver, Canada, I remember. And for some reason, I think there was someone from the Pacific Islands, someplace out there near Australia, someplace like that, who happened to be in the area, something like that. I don't remember specifically who those people were, but I do remember there was some people internationally, and that gave a flavor to it being an international group. The concept of something different than black and white men together, although there were men from other cultures there, was not even part of the debate. I mean, no one had thought of men of all colors. We weren't acting in that way. That took a longer time to develop. But what I recalled about it was walking into the room and seeing just some powerful men. You could who had some very clear ideas and concepts of who they were as gay men. And when I see very clear and about who they are and things of what I'm referencing here, it's clear for that time, if you know what I mean. There are lots of things that happened since then that made things much that we've grown, around those issues. But I remember seeing someone like, John Tingman walk into the room, seeing Michael Smith for the first time. Gorgeous men. Because at that time I was not involved with the relationship, although there were several men in New York that I was interested in. It was, just men who were who not only looked good, but in terms of the way they thought, the way they were thinking about issues, thinking about things, connection with other people, very sociable, all those kinds of things that make a gathering exciting. The agenda itself was exciting. That here we are coming together from all over the country to sort of deal with this, what we were trying to conceptualize in a local area, but thinking about this for the world, and very much being in the vanguard of that, and knowing that that was a place in history, that if we could pull it off, we would in some ways be making history.
Were there actual workshops or plenary sessions, and who actually organized it or pulled it together, would you say?
Well, it was mostly done by the local group in terms of setting up a sort of a structure for what would happen. And we did communicate around some of the things that were to happen before we got there. But obviously the local group had to take a major role in doing that. And it was basically a Mike Smith agenda. He was the one who thought of the idea, and he was the one who promoted and spent the money to pull people together. So I don't remember the exact details of how we came to the agenda for that week, but I assumed from what happened that we had a skeleton at least of what was to happen, what was to take place, and there was some social time as well, and we sort of filled in the gaps by, we did divide up into groups. I remember that, in terms of having certain kinds of discussions, and people, whatever interest they had, they would go to that area.
Is that where the concept, though this may be too early, of the black and white caucuses developed, or was that later on, James?
That was later on. We had, in New York, we had often broken down that way, and I think that may be one of the principles that we came out with in New York. I don't remember all of the things that we went there that we wanted to achieve, but certainly one of them was this idea of shared power in the sense of leadership roles rather than having the traditional models that were available to us at that time. And the other part was our need to separate and to talk about things and come back and present to those issues. And most other groups hadn't had that kind of experience, but from the very beginning we had one of our most powerful discussion was the idea of separating into the two groups and then come back afterwards to share what we came out with. And it was not a disempowering kind of process for the men in New York as it proved to be to other people around the country, other groups around the country.
Was it at that first meeting that the idea of developing a governance structure developed with bylaws and standing rules?
And that was the role of the people who were elected to follow through on getting the election process through the mail-in. Jerry Mallon, as you know, played a vital role in that.
I heard there was a group of 6, is that right?
Yeah.
And I remember reading there was a mail strike at that time, and it interfered with the process.
Yeah, it interfered with the process, and because of that, we really had to depend on some people who were committed to the process to make sure that things would happen. And that's why Gerald's role was so vital.
Now, when you went back to your chapter, I'm sure that you felt empowered, perhaps, because
Yes.
of all these wonderful people you had met and the actual development of a meeting. Did this feed back into your chapter at that point?
It fed back into the chapter, and the dynamics of it, however, was also readily there too, in the sense of this issue I was talking about. It became, in a lot of people's eyes, the situation between Mike Smith and Henry Weimhoff became the New York and San Francisco, and because they both had major influence on what would be going on in the local chapter. Henry was very clear that power relationships in terms of cross-cultural and black and white dynamics need to be examined and explored, and particularly gay men had a special role to play in that. And so he was, you might say, from the Baldwin School. A lot of us had read a lot of Baldwin in terms of a model, and in fact, from the very beginning, one of our major activities was developing a newsletter, and we made a point of key people in this society, such as political leaders and writers, and since they were in the New York area, we knew of their addresses and whatnot, and that led to some very important connections and returns for us in the future, because later on, Baldwin, we used to send our newsletter to him, and he was very interested in reading about us, and he, among a lot of the women, and women, I think, more so than for most of the other groups, women writers and speakers and whatnot have played a key role in helping us develop in New York a sense of what our political position could be and should be in terms of a group that would not only talk the talk, but walk the walk in the sense of how we acted with each other. And Baldwin later, our group was the first group that he ever spoke to. I don't know if people are aware of that. A gay group in the Southeast. There have been some controversy of how openly gay he was. He acknowledged his sexuality, but he very seldom talked about it publicly in any kind of way. And his coming to our group was really the first time that he was presented to the community in a setting where the group was a gay group that presented him. So
which must have fed back a certain wonderful feeling.
Oh
back.
yeah, but that was several years later. That was down the road. I don't even remember. I'm trying to remember the year that he came to the group, but it was a very powerful experience for us at that time. The point was, though, in terms of coming together and being excited about that and taking that back to the group. There, from the very beginning, there was this clash going on.
Now,
and it was manifest not only in the personal relationship between Henry and Mike Smith, Henry Weemoss and Mike Smith, but between the groups as well, because they the groups sort of fell along the lines that they promoted, which was natural when they started the groups. You would think that they would have major influence over where people would go in regards to that.
if you characterized Henry Weimhoff as being a political/intellectual position as well, how would you characterize then Michael Smith as being in opposition? Was he more social?
Well, and I think that's been one of the things that I've grown to understand, is that the categorizations that we were making of each other was not helpful in a process of understanding or trying to work together in terms of a coalition, because one is never fully social, one is never fully political. We're more socio-political than we are one or the other. And I think at that concept, at that time, the fear that we had and that Henry had was the stereotype that ultimately was claimed by the community in terms of the group, that we were just a bunch of folks getting together to fuck. That's basically became, and I think that was one of the fears of why we felt that we needed to have an agenda that had clear discussion of power and reflected in terms of who we work with and how we coalesce with other community members to build the gay community, and what role we played in making that work for our local groups.
Now, if we move ahead one year, 1982, I know that was my first convention, and I remember several new chapters were coming in. So it appears during the course of that year, between the first and second convention, that a lot of work occurred to begin to add structure into the organization. And were you on any of the committees that furthered this?
I don't recall what committees I was on early on. I do know that early on I was very active in the New York chapter and wanted to make sure that the chapter stayed connected with this entity that was being built. Henry was pushed by the group to be more intimately involved. In fact, he was elected one of the Henry and Charles.
Right.
Yeah. And there was support at the local level for that, but we also recognized that if he was going to take this role, then others of us had to make sure that the local group managed to keep it going. I mean, there was always struggles around things like dues and space, because the IHA, the Institute for Human Identity, where we were located, it was a marvelous setup, and we could break ourselves into smaller groups, but that was a problem because there was no real space for a large group at the same time. Like, we were just packed in like sardines, and then we meet, and then we break up into smaller groups to affect the work. But early on, there was a recognition that if some people are going to be involved at the national level, then others of us needed to really take hold and do the local work. And it was exciting to see so many. You always had new people coming in. You always had people coming in with a different kind of agenda, or coming in and staying 1 or 2 meetings, finding it's not for them, and leaving. So there was a flux of people always coming in and leaving. But luckily, we were able to also find people who were committed and who really wanted to do the work. And one of those people was Lydell Jackson, who took over the writing of the newsletter, because that was one of Henry's early functions. And he really wanted to, Henry's process and what he was about ultimately became a person who would come in, get something started, and he didn't feel ownership to it. In fact, he'd rather back off and let it just go and go on its own. And that's essentially what he did. So early on, he was backing off more and more from local work or from involvement with the group, and the group sort of took off and on its own. as he backed away from participation.
Can you remember a highlight of that Washington meeting? Is there anything about that convention that stands out for you?
Washington, the capital.
Do you remember the bus tour that we had?
I'm trying to.
It was a champagne.
It was a champagne bus tour. I remember the bus tour in Atlanta now. Washington, we got to fast forward to Atlanta. Washington is back there someplace, but I don't remember too much about Washington, to tell you the truth. I mean, I'm trying to recall more, and I'm not even very specific about what happened in San Francisco. It's just been such a, it was, you know, I guess the second meeting was just basically for me a sense that, if I recall it, that we could see the building happening and really feeling powerful in that. I do know in the Washington meeting, and actually it's kind of interesting because that's where I first met my current lover, Jan Herman Binka. One of the struggles that we had was how to connect with the larger entities in America, and it wasn't happening for us. Mm-hmm. But we discovered that that the International Lesbian Gay Association was interested and had been wanting to make inroads in America, but there was this block going on for the major groups in America to connect internationally. And in meeting them and talking with them, their agenda was much more focused closer to where we were coming from, because everybody we met in America was, this is our power, we're not about sharing it kind of thing. And they were immediately into getting people involved and seeing the global need for connection among lesbian gay people. And so we connected very easily with them, and they were in Washington at the time, so we met jointly with them, and it was the first connection that they had made with a major force in America. I mean, it was major in the sense of who we were, but certainly not the political arena that other groups were connected to, because we were not connected to the high-level politics in Washington. And that's been one, I think if there is one issue for the group, is never being able to really sustain that connection in a meaningful way. We've had periodic contact at that level, depending on who was the co-chair, but consistency at that level has never been maintained, even with the contact in Washington, or the office in Washington.
Right.
So that's been one of the issues for the group. But what I remember most about it was the connection with not the champagne bus ride. I guess that was the social part of me, and so that was always, you know, I experienced it was great, but that was always in the background. But the political stuff come to the forefront for me. That was connection internationally with the International Lesbian Gay Association.
I believe it was in Washington that we began the Black and White Caucuses. Okay. And I know that, having been a participant, one of my memories was that the White Caucus ended earlier than the Black Caucus.
All right. That's what I was alluding to before when I was talking about the experience in New York was not what happened nationally, because we had Black and White caucuses in New York, and they were great. New York members wanted to really, you know, I mean, I shouldn't say that, because the implication for that is that everybody accepted it in New York. No. It was like the national. There were a core group of, in fact, there was one group at one point, we even had a group that tried to form in Brooklyn because of those kinds of issues. They thought we were too political and all of that. So that was always a